Do you feel the urge to move toward a more play-based practice and just don't know how to do it? Or maybe you're struggling to incorporate more child-led learning into your otherwise teacher-led program. The research is clear. Play is how children learn best during the early childhood years. But creating a classroom where play is the focus isn't always as straightforward as it may seem. I'm your host, Jen Zollinger. Join me as we explore the incredible ways that play serves preschool children and how to best implement it in your classroom. This is Play Before Pencils. A term that I was unfamiliar with when I used a traditional teaching model was process over product. Once you step into the world of play-based education, you're likely to hear it quite frequently. And while it can be applied to many different areas of learning, it is most commonly used when talking about art in early childhood classrooms. Before we get too far into this discussion, let's first define what we mean when we say process over product. Process over product is a philosophy that emphasizes the importance of focusing on the journey or the method of achieving a goal rather than solely on the end result or outcome. It suggests that the way in which something is done is often just as valuable, if not more so, than the final outcome itself. Early childhood classrooms serve as fertile ground for nurturing curiosity, creativity, and critical thinking. It is within these environments that the seeds of lifelong learning are sown. By embracing the principle of process over product, educators foster an atmosphere where children are encouraged to engage deeply with tasks, explore various approaches, and revel in the joy of discovery. Whether it be painting, building blocks, or storytelling, the emphasis is not on the end result, but on the journey of learning and growth that unfolds along the way. When I was teaching in a traditional model, 100% of our art was what I would now call product art. It consisted of a predetermined project, usually one that correlated with the current theme, and I would prepare all of the materials necessary to complete the project and make a sample for the children to follow. Then every child would take essentially the same finished product home. We usually completed these projects as a whole class or in small groups so that we could guide the children to put everything together correctly. The program I was working in when I initially started learning about process over product also utilized product art 100% of the time. But in this school, I did not participate in the planning of the art. The supplies and the sample piece were provided to me. Curious about what the children would do during art time if they no longer had a sample to follow, I started taking it down before they came into the classroom. Because I only had the materials provided for the day at my disposal, the children still had a kit of pieces allotted to them for the project, but I let them do whatever they wanted with those pieces, and it was so much fun to see all of the different ideas that they came up with. I looked forward to the prospect of making a shift to process art when I opened my own program. The thought of giving children the freedom to create whatever their little hearts desired was exciting, but I quickly found that there was an obstacle that I hadn't anticipated, and I suspect that I'm not the only one. Process art has a tendency to get messy. I am someone who thrives in environments where there is order and cleanliness, which some might see as an indication that maybe I'm in the wrong profession, as orderly and clean are not typically words that people use to describe children. But I have been able to put systems into place that allow my children to function in a fairly orderly manner, even when it looks like chaos from the outside. When it came to art, though, I had a few extra heart palpitations over that one. Initially, I found that I could ease into this new change I had embraced by holding on to a little bit of control over the materials. You want some blue paint? Great, let me squeeze some into your paint tray. My default way of thinking shunned waste, and I could just see the dollar signs every time someone used more glue than I felt was necessary, or anytime that huge globs of paint were left behind to be washed down the sink. Yes, I was letting the children choose what their art would look like, but I was still withholding much of the process from them. I'll admit that it was not an overnight adjustment for me to make, and freedom in the Art Center came little by little. Today, my students have access to whatever they need to create, and I've grown accustomed to helping them clean up their messes. It's not a free-for-all. We spend time at the beginning of the school year learning about each of the art supplies, how to use them appropriately, such as making sure that our glue sticks are twisted down far enough that the lid will go on without squishing the glue, or listening for the lid of a marker to snap so that we know that it's on tight. With a little bit of instruction under their belts, I've found that my students are generally quite respectful of the art supplies in our classroom. But creating is still a messy process. And even though they are trying to be mindful, pretty much every day we still end up with glue and paint all over the table, sometimes even the floor, and shards of cut up paper will litter the art area. Craft supplies have to be sorted and returned to their designated areas. There is still work involved in allowing the children to have access to art supplies without micromanaging them. But it doesn't have to fall completely on the teacher. Your students are perfectly capable of helping to clean up most of their messes. And when they do, they are often more aware the next time that they pull out a table full of supplies. There are so many benefits to prioritizing process over product, and one of my favorite is seeing the individuality of each child coming through in their art. Unlike product art, when children engage in process art, every finished piece is unique. Even when I have taught a certain art technique, such as resistance painting, where watercolors are painted over the top of crayon or oil pastel drawings, the way that each child expresses themselves in their art is different, and each piece tells a story about the child who created it. Another great benefit to process art is that it honors each child's interests, strengths, and developmental needs, which fosters a sense of ownership and agency over their art. I had a student once who loved sea life. Anytime he visited the art area, I knew that he would be creating a squid or an octopus or an exotic fish with a name I couldn't even pronounce. It was delightful to watch his art evolve as the year went on. It was like its own little progress report, showing how his abilities had increased over time. If I had continued to maintain all control over the art center, I likely wouldn't have seen this wonderful process unfold, and any messes that were made in the creation of his art were long forgotten. When we emphasize process over product in early childhood classrooms, we promote intrinsic motivation and a growth mindset. When children are freed from the pressure of producing a perfect end product, they are more inclined to take risks, to make mistakes, and learn from their experiences. This fosters resilience, perseverance, and a belief in one's own ability to learn and improve, instilling in children a love for learning itself rather than mere compliance with predetermined standards or expectations. If you find yourself relying on product art because it is predictable and it can be carried out in a more controlled manner, now is a great time to start taking steps toward more freedom in the art center. Transitioning to a process art approach can be incredibly rewarding for both you and your preschool students. Here are some things to consider as you get started. First, you need to educate yourself. Take some time to learn about the principles and benefits of process art. Understanding the philosophy behind it will help you implement it effectively in your classroom. Second, start to introduce the concept to your students. Explain to them the difference between process art and product art. Emphasize that in process art, we focus on the experience of creating rather than the end result. You can take some time to review appropriate use of materials and instill in your students trust that they are capable of taking on this new responsibility. Third, create a supportive environment. Set up a space in your classroom dedicated to process art. Make sure that it's well stocked with a variety of art materials such as paints, markers, crayons, clay, collage materials, and more. Allow children easy access to these materials so that they can explore freely. If messiness is a worry, add a drop cloth underneath the table and keep a trash can nearby. Fourth, you can provide open-ended prompts. Instead of giving specific instructions for art projects, offer open-ended prompts that encourage creativity and self-expression. For example, you could ask students to create a picture using only their favorite color, or to make a sculpture inspired by nature. Because your students are used to seeing a finished sample to copy, they may need a little nudge to get started. And so you might consider teaching specific art techniques to help bridge the gap between full instructions for how to make an art piece and freely creating on their own. Next, you need to encourage experimentation. Encourage your students to experiment with different materials, techniques, and textures. Let them explore mixing colors, using unconventional tools for painting, or incorporating found objects and loose parts into their artwork. The children will likely find this to be really exciting, especially if their access to the art materials has been heavily monitored by an adult in the past. Teach your children to embrace mistakes. Remind yourself and your students that there are no right or wrong answers in process art. Encourage your students to embrace mistakes as opportunities for learning and exploration. Next, I encourage you to involve parents. Keep the parents informed about your shift to process art and encourage them to support their child's creative endeavors at home. Parents often expect their child to come home from school with cutesy product art each week. I have found that they can't get enough of process art once I've let them know what the approach I'm taking looks like and how it benefits children. They take so much joy in seeing the art that their child creates authentically. Last, be patient and flexible. Transitioning to a process art approach may take some time, like it did for me, especially if you and your students are accustomed to a more product-focused approach. Be patient with yourself, be patient with your students, and be open to making adjustments based on their interests and needs. By implementing these suggestions, you'll create a rich and stimulating environment where your preschool students can explore their creativity, develop important skills, and experience the joy of self-expression through art. Thanks again for listening. Remember to hit that subscribe button to continue learning how to bring more play into your classroom. Plus, get more tips on Instagram at play_before_pencils or at playbeforepencils.com.